אנו שמחים לחבור לסיינס וברוד לסדרת וובינרים חשובה זו. הערב מפגש שלישי בנושא עבודת צוות, בניית קבוצת מחקר. איך להביא את החוקרים הנכונים אל פתח המעבדה שלך, איך לגרום להם לרצות להישאר, מה לדרוש ואלה גבולות חשוב לכבד. שמחה וגאה להציג את דוקטור איבו שפיגל, ראש המעבדה הרב-תחומית לחקר האופנים והיא משפיע הניסיון על תפקוד המוח במכון ויצמן. דוקטור שפיגל החל את לימודיו בביולוגיה של התא וחקר המוח באוניברסיטת תל אביב, המשיך לדוקטורט בפקולטה לרפואה באוניברסיטת הרווארד וחזר ארצה בסוף 2015. מעבדתו של דוקטור שפיגל במחלקה לניורוביולוגיה במכון ויצמן עוסקת בלמידת מבוגרים, כלומר, כיצד סוגים שונים של תאי עצב בקליפת המוח מסדירים את הפלסטיות של מעגלים מוחיים. על אף שחוקרים הניחו בעבר שהאינטגרציה של מידע מבחוץ ומבפנים מתרחשת בקליפת המוח, לא היו עוד כה ממצאים משמעותיים לגבי מנגנונים אלה. איבו, הבמה הווירטואלית כולה שלך. להזכירכם, הוובינר מוקלט ויהיה זמין לצפייה בכל עת באתרי מכון צוקרמן וסיינס וברוד. איבו, בבקשה.
תודה רבה על ההקדמה או האינטרודקשן המאוד נעים. If that's okay, I will speak in English so that also our English-speaking listeners and guests will have an opportunity to understand. It's fine if you want to ask your questions in Hebrew. Both English and Hebrew are okay. So what I will talk today about is actually how to establish a group, and that means how to get those, just to give you my credentials, why I can talk about this. So I myself do have, the lab has currently more or less, let me show this to you, my lab has currently 12 members, including myself. It's one PI, it's one staff scientist, it's a lab manager, 5 PhD students, and 4 master students, 2 outgoing master students, 2 incoming master students. Gender ratio is 2:1 for the women. And these are all small details that you want to pay attention to when putting your group together. So we're about between 10 and 12 people. There's constantly someone coming and going. Now, the lab is fairly young. We're only 4 years old. So whatever I will be saying today, you want to take this with a very large grain of salt, because what I'm talking about is really my experience. And one thing that I will be coming back to again and again is that this is a very personal thing. You are the boss, and the lab will be what you want it to be, and it will be in your image. So let me just share the screen again. I will be going back and forth between sharing the screen and not, and showing you and talking to you directly. What the goal for me of today's webinar for you is to give you an idea what you might want to pay attention to when you put your lab together. Again, this is based on my own experience. You are different people, and so your group will look very different than my group will look, because you are different. But some of the things that I mentioned, I think I've seen a lot of groups around me pay attention to this, and I think they might be beneficial to you. All right, so what will we discuss? Whom do I need to have in lab? What are positions that I need to have filled? How do I find and hire these folks? And once I have in lab, how do I foster a working group? How do I get them to work, how to manage and how to resolve? And finally, we'll have a Q&A whereby I should be saying, whenever you feel like asking a question, I will try to pay attention to you all. Ask a question or send me a message in the chat. I will also stop at the end of each section for you guys to ask questions. a few of the, so I just mentioned these ground rules. Alrighty. So before we get started, what I would like to know from you all is, who are you? So whom do I talk to? If you, and we're gonna make this very simple by hand raising. So if you are a postdoc who has a job, who knows that who has a job offer essentially. Who of you is a postdoc who has a job offer? 1, 2. Alrighty. Who is a postdoc who does not yet have a job offer? 1, 2, 3. Okay. So that means all the rest of you are PIs who have really a lot of experience, I guess. Who is already a PI? None. So something arithmetic here doesn't really work. I see, give or take, well, a large number of screens, but only 5 people. So the things that I will talk about are really to some degree relevant, most relevant if you will be starting, if you know that you will be starting your own group, if you intend at some point to open your group. Shachar, Meidan, Meidenbaum, I saw that you tried to raise your hand. Sorry that it didn't show. You are counted. You are accounted for. What I want to say is that some of the things that I mentioned, you might want to pay attention to during your postdoc. How does your current lab head manage this? And I think it's always, at least for me, it was very good to learn by example. Things that I do like, things that I don't like. I think that was for me the best thing. And then you copy kind of the things that you like, and you blend them with your own, and you don't do the things that you dislike. Alrighty. So first step is, whom do I need to hire? And let me share the screen back. Okay, so whom do I actually need in lab? This is a rhetoric question. Let's think about it like that. What do I actually need to run a research lab? What are the things that I really need? So one thing that I definitely need is a topic. What will my infrastructure, the equipment, the space, the lab, whatever it is, and your institution should grant that. Otherwise, what is your institution good for? Then you need money. You have a startup package. Maybe you are as lucky as me and you get the Zuckerman funding. Whatever it is, you need money, and you will have money, and you can get that from a grant. And then last but not least, you need the people, and you need to recruit them. This is on you. This will not be done for you. All right, so whom do you need? This essentially goes by the nature of your research. You hire, or you want to have, I think, only people in your research group who are directly contributing to your research goal. The product of your lab is research, or whatever you define as the goal. The way the research looks in your lab, this can do single person linear projects. One person does it all. There's labs that work, in a very team-oriented way, multi-person interwoven projects. Then there's labs that are organized in a way that it's single-person projects, but these single persons are assisted by kind of core facilities within the lab. And again, there is no correct answer. It really depends what you need to attain your research goals. So you just have to think of yourself, what is it I do? There is no correct, there is no right or wrong. And I think that's important to remember. You have many situations where there is no right or wrong. You just have to figure out what is for yourself. And you will make mistakes, and that's fine. It's like parenting. You will make mistakes. It's fine. That is built in. There's not a single PI who has not done mistakes. But what you want to also bear in mind is that the timing is a crucial thing, right? Initially, you cannot do everything at once. So you want to think, what do I want to do first? What do I want to do after? And this might change because for various reasons. For example, you did get a grant for the one thing, but not for the other. Or the one idea that you had that seemed great, you just were scooped. So this is, you know, off the shelf. Or it might be, as it was for me, that a person walks in the door of your lab and this person just completely changes what you can do and adds a whole new dimension that you did not even think of you would be doing, or you thought you might be doing, you know, 5 years down the road. Now this person of your lab becomes different. And so you want to roll with the punches to some degree. Don't lose sight of the big picture, but you want to roll with the punches and the opportunities. It's not just punches. All right. So by and large, more or less, someone who kind of organizes stuff. Sometimes you need someone with specialized skills, and that can be, you know, very different things. A bioinformatician, someone who operates an electron microscope, whatever. Someone who knows about algorithms. It really can be whatever it is. Sometimes you need these people. Then you definitely want to have trainees. We will talk about that at length. Research in Israel is driven by trainees. Also in the US, the trainees are a bit different. In the US, it's mainly postdocs like yourselves. In Israel, it's mainly students and graduate students. And on top of the trainees, you sometimes want to have a lab technician. So now that you know whom you need, and you kind of start defining your needs, where do you find these folks and how do you recruit them? All right. So when you come to hire people, what I felt or what I experienced is a good thing to think about is what is the motivation of these people? Why do these people look for a job? Because once you know that, you can actually think about, you know, how do I recruit these people? Or to say in other words, if I want to recruit someone who is primarily interested in, say, money, I won't try to hire him for a position that I don't have much money for. I mean, this is a bad example, but this is kind of the idea. So you want to have an idea of what is the motivation. Now, in very rough terms, what is the motivation of lab manager or a technician for the science? They want a job. They want a job. They come looking for a job. So what you should steady, usually okay paying, and it should be regular academic chaos, which students might be tolerating. What are your requirements? That's the second thing to think about. What would you like this person to do? Does this person only take care of orders and, say, machine maintenance? Or would you like to this person to be taking care of some lab work, whatever, say genotyping of mice? What is the character that you're looking for in this person? Would you like to have like a lab mom, lab dad? What is the education of this person? Previous experience? What are the personal attributes, as we said, that you're looking for on top of whether they should be a lab mom or a lab dad? You really rely on interface with. Do they work only with you, or do they give some service to, say, the students? That is something important to take into consideration, because ultimately you have to describe to these people the job that you want to offer them. And then last but not least, what is my budget, right? Do I have a lot of money for this job or not? So much for your requirements and expectations. So where do you find these people? In my experience, these jobs like these usually can be filled by advertisements through the human resources department. You put out an ad, I'm looking for someone this and this with this job qualification, and usually you get a lot of offers. And then you have to sift through them, and we'll talk about how you sift through them. Another option is, whatever, the professor goes into pension. There's someone, you have already a recommendation. It's often useful to take someone within the system. Say you join a university, that this person has already worked at this particular place. Why? Because they know all the administration and all the in and outs of this particular place. That makes life, at least initially, very easy. All right, so much for the lab manager. Next, highly skilled personnel. Are there questions so far? Yes, no, let me check for the other ones. If you have a question, make a clap or raise a thumb or so, something like this. No, not yet. Okay. Here's one. I tried to raise my hand, but it didn't work. I'm a postdoc with an offer. No, this is again Shachar, so no further questions so far. Alrighty. Next, these are the highly skilled workers. And I'm sharing here again my screen. Just a sec. Now, then what we talked about for the lab technician. So who are these? We said these are people who have real, specialized skill, and their motivation is completely different. Usually they are in it for the science or for interest. Usually they look for an interesting job. They can pick their jobs. So sometimes it's also due to outside circumstances, convenience, family reasons that they cannot be PIs themselves, and so forth. Another motivation is often tenure, that they enter a track where they can get tenure. Now, based on their motivation, of course, you have to offer them something completely different than what you would have to offer to a student or to a say the lab manager. So for those guys, you have to offer a job that is really interesting. And they're highly wanted. So for those guys, you really want to kind of cross an ocean to get those. On the other side, if you do get them and they kind of answer your expectations, they are real force multipliers. Either they're another one like you, so now all of a sudden instead of one of you, it's two of you who have a lot of experience, or they add a whole new dimension to your lab. And that's, for example, what happened in my lab. And that was, it completely changed the nature of the lab. As always, also here, I think it's clear to formulate expectations. What do I want them to do? Should they have, for example, independent projects? That is an option. Or should they more be something like a core facility in lab and help all the other members? Would I like them to instruct other lab members in whatever they're good at? So these are things to take into consideration. Where do you find these people? Essentially, you don't find them. Usually they find you. So you got to help them to find you. One good thing is definitely the personal communication. You just spread the word. You talk to everybody whom you know here in Israel and abroad. You can use Twitter, has in my experience really not worked well. I put a bazillion times out job ads in Twitter, zero response. I think in the end of the day, you attract those people by the science that you do. Alrighty. So much about these guys. Last but not least, the students. Why do I say last but not least? Because the students really are as you all know, are the primary workforce in your lab. Let's do another poll here. Who has done their PhD in Israel? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, more. Okay, so it's a decent number. So all of you guys have an idea or know this that in Israel the workforce are PhD students. So and workforce, I mean this in a good sense, not this. It might sound negative. I mean this in the best sense possible. So the students really are what make kind of the major body or the major group in your lab. And they're really the guys who define the nature of your lab. Now, this can go both ways, right? If you have great students, then this is the best thing ever. And for me personally, I feel like, the work with my students is, that's kind of the sukaya during the day. How do you recruit good students? A few of you asked. Well, try to remember what made you join your grad student labs. let's think again about the motivation with students. They want to get to the next stage. They want to get a degree. And very often with students, there is this thing called a coolness factor, right? How cool is the lab? And the coolness thing can be many things. It can be a particular technique. It can be that the lab is in a new building. That's a big coolness thing. It can be just a supervisor is kind of the coolest guy on faculty, and he's the dude, or she is the dude. So that's, I think, in very general sense, their motivation. Let's talk about requirements and expectation. I mean, everybody has their own style. Ideally, you would have someone, who is smart, enthusiastic, wants to work all the time, etc., etc., etc. And at the same time plays the piano and whatnot. Usually that is not the case. So you have to kind of think, what do you value more? In my personal view, and that is really just my view, I like people who are enthusiastic. I myself tend to be enthusiastic about my science. I like to work with people who are as enthusiastic as me. I feel like it helps me much more to work with people who are enthusiastic than people who are not enthusiastic but have a lot of brains. The lack of enthusiasm is not something that I can help with. The lack of knowledge I can help them acquire. I would strongly suggest to be selective. Take only students who you think are good. It's true, students require much more investment, but think about yourselves. All of you have been students. I guess most of you think about yourselves that you're pretty good. So obviously it was worth to your PIs to raise you. And even though it might take a PI, working with the students is just, that is the best part of my work, flat out. I really enjoy it. So be patient, and get the return. Now, how do you recruit good students? I think teaching is important, particularly if you're a new faculty. Go out there and teach and be nice and engaging. That's it. Mouth to ear propaganda works really well in Israel. If you get the name of your being just, a mean dude, people won't be coming to you. But if you get a name of, yes, you're supportive and you're doing awesome stuff, people will come. Another thing that you want to bear in mind is reach out to students. So it's not what I do is I look for an applicant that I think is like, okay, she is the one. I really want her to in my lab. She looks awesome on paper. Let's talk to her. Shachla, I see you. I'll ask you in a while. I'll get to you in a moment. Reach out. Hey, I've seen your CV. You look exactly like the person who fits my lab. Why don't you come and be chat for a bit? That's it. And spend money. If you spend on a student, whatever, 2,000 shekels, 5,000 shekels for a conference, that's $1,000. That's nothing. If through this you're able to recruit the student who you think is really good, that is a super good investment. The return will be phenomenal. Shachal, let me unmute you. Shachal, were you asking a question? You're unmuted.
No, it was just raised before when you asked before.
Sorry, you still can ask. You did not miss the train. What's up? What can I help you with? Not relevant anymore? Alrighty. So much about whom we want to hire. Next, how do I choose whom I hire? And well, that's again a tricky one. Whom do we hire? Now we know whom we want to hire, and we get those people in lab, but how do we actually pick the ones? Let me just a sec. Second. All right. So whom do we decide on whom to hire? you can be somewhat relaxed about this. This is a whole, the hiring process is very difficult, not only for you. So no matter what you do, it's anyway a crap shot. So your chances of being right or wrong, or I want to say close to 50-50, no matter what you do. So you don't have to be too anxious about it. But still, of course, you want to do your due diligence. Now, another thing to bear in mind is there is no such thing as a best hire. There is only a good fit for you and your team. And that's kind of, this should give you some, how should I say, it should make you a bit more relaxed. A guy might be phenomenal in one lab, but he might be terrible in another lab. This has nothing to do with either of the labs or this person. It's just a matter of fit, and you got to find the people who fit you. So having said that, I strongly suggest to be selective. Take only folks whom you feel good with, or you feel like, okay, they're going to really add to my lab. Because particularly when you start out, your group's going to be really small, 3-4 people, something like this. Over time, it will grow a bit. But if among these 3-4 people, there is one guy who is just like, it just doesn't work with him, this is totally disruptive. And I'm telling you from experience. And it's not that this person might be a bad guy. It's just that he doesn't fit in. And so that is something really to pay attention to. Even in the lab, you can say, oh, even the lab is already, 10, 12 people. So they can, this easily, can, if one guy is not really jiving with the group, ain't a big deal. No, that is actually a big deal. So the people that you hire, they should fit you and the group. It's not just you. They should fit in. That they fit in is really important. And in this regard, I would say pay attention to your gut instinct and to your biases, because you're plenty of both of them. It can easily happen that you really, we will talk about this in a moment, it's so-called homophily. So really pay attention to your biases. All of us have biases, and that's fine. We just should be aware of them. And if you're very new, so if this is your first hire and here comes this postdoc candidate, feel free to ask your colleagues. For example, this postdoc postdoc candidate gives a job talk, ask a colleague to sit in. I did that from both sides, was sitting in for colleagues of mine and had colleagues invite for postdoc candidates. That's fine. There's nothing bad about this, just to get a second opinion. Alrighty, so how do we choose whom we want to hire? It starts out, so you get documentation, CV, grades, letters of recommendation. Feel free to call someone. If the letter is not good enough, call the person who wrote the letter. I did that. It was super helpful. One of my best grad students, I called the person. I didn't have a real feeling. Let's call the previous PI, right? You can read the papers. And once all this is like, okay, this looks interesting, invite them for a personal conversation. And one thing that I often like doing is I send them a bit of reading material, a few papers. It's not so much that I want to discuss the papers, but it shows me whether the person put actually effort into reading these papers. This, gives you an idea. Is this person in it for real? Oh, okay, so now you start talking. And it usually starts off, is there something to be talked about or not? Should we take this further? And so forth. I usually, nothing's in a rush. Talk a few times. Now, if this person is good, then you start bothering your lab mates about this person, or your lab members about this person. Invite the person for a full interview, or if it's a rotation student, tell the person, yeah, go talk to my lab mates or my students. And we'll talk after this again. If it's for a PhD candidate, the person has done a master's, ask them to give a talk about their master's studies. Postdoc, anyway, they did a PhD, they should be in a position to give a talk. Have them talk with everybody. Once this is done, consult with the lab members. After all, it's the lab members that eventually will have to bear this guy, right? You're sitting in your office, but those guys have to hang out with this person. So having this person, interact with your group is really important, and it's really important for you to hear the feedback from your group. Then last but not least, if you can, invite the person for a trial period. here at the Weizmann Institute, we have these rotations, but even if you don't have rotations, for example, for graduate students, for master students, we have the rotations, but not for graduate students. So for graduate students, even those guys, I invite them essentially for a rotation. And we say this very clearly, right? 2-3 months, you come, we define ahead of time how much time, you work, and after this, we decide whether this is a good fit. And it's not about whether you're good enough. It's really about whether this is, you still don't know the person. You get to know someone, I would say, after you work with this person for 2-3 years, then you really start to have a feeling. But 2-3 months gives you already an idea of kind of where the wind is blowing from. And again, you call and consult with your lab members. If it's a go, great. Then you hire the person. And if not, goodbye. And you part ways, and that's that. And there is nothing bad about this. Alrighty, a few words about interviews. The thing to bear in mind about interviews is that you can say in a way they're the most imperfect tool for evaluating people. Yet we all do it, right? And they're imperfect for several reasons. One is each one of us has a ton of biases, and we usually look for the people who are most similar to us. I mean, behavioral interviews and behavioral studies have shown this again and again. We tend to give higher grades to people who look like us. This is the so-called homophily. Now, not all the people who will walk in are like us. And in fact, you don't want to, or at least I don't want to have all the people in my lab be like me. I can barely stand myself. I want to have everybody be like me. And I think there is really a lot of strength in diversity of ideas and backgrounds. So having a diverse crowd, in my view, is advantageous. And so you want to be aware of your biases. Bear in mind that the situation usually is extremely stressful for the applicant. So, try to make to feel them at ease, at least initially. Another thing that we tend to do in interviews is actually that we speak and not the applicant. So let the applicant speak. Ask as few questions as possible. Just let them speak. You will know about them. It's not so much about yourself. Another thing, that is kind of important is try to get a feel. Is it pleasant to work with to talk to this person? Is this person so afraid that say the gaze constantly goes aside, the person looks everywhere in the room but not at you? Another thing is, of course, you then want to talk about, you want to prepare the interview, right? There are certain points that you want to talk about. So the preparation of the interview is key. Read the CV, think ahead of time what you want to talk about. Sometimes even role play the interviews. And so that is a thing that has been extremely helpful to me, that just when I started, I was able to join such a kind of a young PI workshop by this company called HFP. And we role played interviews. So I interview a guy, and the third person sits on the side and watches me interview the person, this mock interview. And that is extremely helpful, because then this third person can tell you, listen, you're extremely aggressive in your interviews, or the other way around. You talk only about yourself, or what did you actually learn in this interview? Or you're doing this thing well, or this thing not so well. So having mock interviews, in my view, is very useful. Now, in terms of points to cover, what do you want to talk about? You want to be kind of, on the one side, you want to know what you want to talk about. On the other side, you also don't want to, disrupt the conversation that is freely flowing. So the kind of the key is to roll the conversation into the direction you would like to have. So usually what you have there is, have an introduction, a chit chat in the beginning to make the other person feel at ease, whatever. Talk about soccer, talk about the weather, talk about whatever you want. Just, let the conversation flow. However long this takes, say 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. And then try to steer it into a direction. Let's talk about previous experience. What did you do in the past? And again, there I like to let the people be coherent, and so forth. Next, you kind of want to, again, let the person talk. What are they expecting from this job? What interests them? Why this job, not another one, and so forth. And then, you come to what are the opportunities in your lab, and there it's kind of a back and forth. And in the end, you have a wrap up, and then that's that. But be aware that these interviews must be prepared and that you have a lot of biases. So when you replay the interview in your head, you want to think of these things, right? Any questions at this point about the hiring part? Yes, no, maybe?
Hi, so this is Shachar. I wanted to ask about during Corona time, like how are you adapting to COVID during this hiring process?
Essentially the same way. It's just whatever can be done in person, I like to do in person, and whatever cannot be done in person cannot be done in person. As simple as that. But I wouldn't make shortcuts in hiring. One thing to bear in mind, and I think I had this on one of these slides, is it's very easy to hire people. It's very hard to get rid of them. So it's once you hire a person, you really would like to not be in a situation that you have to part ways. If you have to part ways, you part ways. But ideally, you want to be kind of really have a good idea as possible about the person that you're hiring. I think for me personally, these trial periods have worked extremely well. Extremely well. So we have at the Weizmann Institute, we have these rotation for master's students. And I think this is for both sides a blessing because the PIs get an idea of who the student is and the students get a pretty good idea of what the lab like is. I mean, it's an interview situation for both, right? It's not just that this goes one way. Is that Shacha, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, you answered the basic question, but as a follow-up question, like, do you feel like a new lab should hire less people, hire more people during COVID? Like, should we wait with hiring for after?
I think that really, I don't think it's kind of a one shoe fits all. I think that really depends on you and the opportunities that you have. I think for me personally, hiring a lab manager was very helpful early on because it takes off a load of administrative duty for me. On the other side, I did not have a lab initially. It took me a year until my lab was built, or 9 months. During this time, even if I would wanted to hire a student, they just didn't come. So, whatever I want to do, they were just not there. On the other side, a person walked in that, as I said, this staff scientist that completely changed lab. And I should also say, during this time, in these first 9 months, I hired a postdoc that I then had to let go after half a year because it was clear that our expectations do not align. This person was great. It's just not great for me. So I guess you're as smart as you were before, no?
Thanks.
Thanks, but you didn't help me.
I mean, no, I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously,
you have Shacha, you have already a job offer?
Yes, I have a job offer.
Where are you going?
And I'm going to Ben Gurion, and I'm debating like how many people to hire at this point, with the specific question of given quarantine, given potential delays in equipment and things like that. Should I like delay more with hiring, or should I just hire and start running?
You want to think about it like that. You hire people so that they do something. If the infrastructure is not there that they can do anything, don't hire them, right? Unless there is someone, the 1 in a million. But I promise you, students are not 1 in a million. The highly skilled people, those are the 1 in a million guys, right? The 1 in a million student, there are some of them. I'm not saying that not, but by and large, there's really, we're in Israel blessed with very good students. So you will find them again. All right? Okay. It doesn't make sense to have students hanging around for half a year without a lab. That is not effective. I think that's kind of, once you hire someone, you want to have the person be able to do work. Otherwise, it's frustrating for everybody involved. Is that a good rule of thumb?
Yeah.
All right, we move on. And what do we talk about now? Right. So now that we have our hires, now that we have our hires, how do we actually form out of these hires kind of, koach machats that really will, turn the world of science upside down? That's a tricky beast. Furthermore, you're not hiring all of them at once. I would say there's kind of two things. One is team spirit. Team spirit is a really good thing, even if you're not kind of, the gung-ho guy. But everybody likes to be in Sayeret Matkal. Everybody wants to be with the best. So give them the feeling that they are the best. Whatever the best is, right? We are the lab with the coolest technology. We work on the most important questions, whatever. We drink most beer. Whatever it is, we're the youngest kid on the block and we're the the least square guys. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But having a sense of kind of this cold esprit de corps is very helpful. That I think is something that helps a lot. And I think the other thing, and that's mainly for you to bear in mind, is that there is this unwritten code. Anyone knows Bill Belichick? I want to see who knows Bill Belichick. All the Americans should know Bill Belichick. Can I see some thumbs? Bal, who is Bill Belichick? Bal Mosevsky Liz. You're unmuted. I'm trying to unmute you. So Bill Belichick is this legendary coach of the football team, New England Patriots, and his philosophy is kind of do your job. And so everybody does their job. That's kind of the key here. The students and the people in your lab, they do as good as they can. They pitch in as much as they can. But the unwritten code here is that you do as well. It's not that they work for you. You work for them just as much. And that is very important. It is incumbent upon you. You are the one who has to help them reach their goals, whatever the goal is. For a student, to a PhD program they want. For the PhD student, it is to get to the postdoc that they want, whatever it is. So that is really on you, and your personal evaluation depends on them reaching their goal. So, or to say this in even kind of a more blunt way, their success is really your success. So you really want to help them to be successful. Another consideration that kind of is obvious but not so easy to follow, the lab has to be such that it is comfortable for everybody, right? No one should be afraid coming to lab or scared coming to lab. So that means the atmosphere has to be at least polite, call it professional, whatever you want it. But you say hello, you say goodbye. It has to be such that you can't have bullying. That is just impossible. And you can say, well, this anyway never happens, but we all know how things go. So this is something that you want to really pay attention to, that people behave to each other nicely. Another thing that I think is very important to realize is that different people have different needs, and it's not a one fit all. So you as the PI have to think about what are the needs of my students? How do I help them? Whatever. Life happens. Unfortunately, God forbid, parents of someone get sick. How can I help them? Maybe I have to hire a technician for them, or maybe I have to rearrange their project. This is kind of important stuff, and kind of related to this is treat them the way you would like to be treated. Now, this is not an imitation of your parents, but it's more like think of them, what is best for them, not always what is best for you. And that's, I think that kind of sets a tone. Now, another thing also is you got to realize you're the boss, but that doesn't mean that you're without mistakes. So you want to be, it's stating the obvious, but you kind of want to be aware of the fact, that you make mistakes, and you would like to have a situation where you encourage your students also to help you improve yourself. So what this all comes down to by and large, is that the communication between you and your lab members is key. Now, again, this might be stating the obvious, but I think the more you're aware of this, the better you can foster this and the better you can kind of build in mechanisms that enable this. So one mechanism that can build this in are weekly meetings. And I guess you all know this in some way or another. Nevertheless, I wanted to summarize this here, what kind of weekly meetings we have in our lab. Let me just show this here. So we have a lot of weekly meetings. I like it that way. So one thing that we have is a lab meeting. That's about 2 hours. I think most labs have this. The purpose is to summarize progress, get input from the whole group together. Each lab member presents at their turn. So in my group, this turns out everybody presents more or less every 3 months. If it happens that someone cannot present, for example, whether they're new or they didn't have progress, okay, so let's have a journal club instead. Another thing that we do, and that I think that I learned from my PI in the US, and that is super useful, are these small groups. And the idea here is it's every week. You split up the group into into groups of 4 or 5 people, and those guys kind of meet every week with their lab notebooks. What happened in the last week? What will I do next week? What came out? What are the obstacles? And so forth. Usually I try to take them together so that they're thematically related, so they can help each other, right? This is, for me, a good way to keep track of everybody's progress. I write down what they do. And it also helps them to see that they're not alone and they are able to help each other. That is, for me, really a useful thing. And also, it allows me to not lose track of each one, but I'm also not sitting in their face for a whole hour. So it's a very time efficient thing. It's not that I meet one-on-one with everybody, but if they want, they can do that, but they definitely have once a week I see them. Also, if during a week nothing happened, then that's fine. You know, they themselves don't want to be 3 times in a week in a row in the situations where nothing happens. So this is very useful. And on top of that, we have what we call a journal blitz. And the idea of this is that it just helps us to keep up with literature. There's so much literature coming out. There is so much literature coming out. I feel like that that we should be helping each other to make this happen. A whole paper, usually it's not a whole paper. It's not just something that they read in the last week that they feel like, you know, everybody should have, you know, be aware of this. It can be a whole paper, it can be a figure, it can be an experiment, something that they read and like, okay, guys, I've read this is relevant. And this is a fairly informal thing. It happens with coffee now. Obviously, because of COVID, we do this over Zoom, but this was usually, I like this a lot. Of course, everybody hates it because it's like early in the morning, but it's these things that help to develop the group thing. Initially, it's a bit lame, true. Initially, it's only 2-3 people and you're not yet experts, but within 2-3 years, you actually read these papers and you're like real experts and say, hey, dude, this stuff is awesome, or the other way around. What they did there totally doesn't make sense. We're doing such an experiment that is way better. So I feel like this is very helpful. Then there is kind of less organized other forms of communication, which are, what should I say, just as important. They're just not in such a formalized way. Stuff that I do for the whole group. These are administrative updates, and particularly in days of coronavirus, this is super important. Just let people know what's going on. Even if something is going on and you don't have the answer, let them know. Because the most destructive thing or the most unsettling thing position to be in is something is happening and I have no idea what is actually happening. So I try to be as informed, as proactive with information as possible. And another thing that is kind of for the whole group is literature. I read a paper, I get details of comments, other people in lab get details of comments. I just send them out. It doesn't mean that I have read them, but I feel like, you know, I've seen this could be interesting. The way to do, I usually use email for this stuff. Many labs use Slack. Somehow I was so far too lazy to try and do that. But team members, this really has to be tailored to each one's need. Some people need a lot of supervision and they would like that, and other people say, you know, that's fine, you know. And it can also change, right? There's times when you have more involvement of the PI or not. At any rate, you want to pay attention to that. And you want to pay attention to the moods of your lab members. Are they in a good mood or are they not in a good mood? Are they depressed or are they not depressed? Most of your trainees are still relatively young. So be aware of that. Are they entering a situation of stress? Do they need help, etc., etc.? So these are things you really want to be on top of, because your students are your biggest asset. The students and the money, in this order, they are really important. So be involved. Try to help them. Now, obviously, you want to be careful about this. I mean, don't send out, don't send out. I would suggest not to send out mails, say at 2 o'clock in the morning, because it generates a feeling that, you know, they have to be present all the time. So you also want to respect some boundaries, and you will learn over time what these boundaries are. So, I mean, for example, I send out mails at 6 o'clock in the morning because I get up at 5 and then I have an hour and stuff comes through my head. But for example, I would not send out mails at whatever, 8 o'clock Friday evening when I know it's the weekend. Okay. This stuff is not so important. It can wait until a whole day, and I'll send it out. Motzei Shabbat, all good. Let's see, what else did we have here? Right. So here's another topic I think that is on a lot of people's mind, and this is this issue about collaborations within lab. Let's do another quick round. Who is having a collaboration within lab in your postdoc or during your grad studies? Ilana, can you describe to us what is your collaboration?
Hi, yeah. I'm a postdoc and I work pretty closely with a PhD student. I'm not mentoring her per se, work sort of equal on the project. I'm dividing up wet and dry work, the informatics and the wet work.
What do you think is an advantage and what is a disadvantage?
It's a great advantage if we work together well, if we can really jive and feed off each other. It's a disadvantage if we sort of cross paths and start doing the same things or, you know, being redundant to one another.
Is this a situation where one does a favor to the other?
In this case, no. In this case, we're the same goal.
Okay.
And we're both trying to get to that goal, and we're bouncing ideas off each other, and it's actually very fruitful.
Okay. Did you guys set the terms of your collaboration early on, or have you not set them at all yet? Meaning, you know, if this project succeeds, have you guys talked about, I mean, let's boil it down to what we really care about. Have you talked about orders of authorship?
So no, not orders of authorship on the paper. It was thought that there might be 2 papers and one would be this way and one would be the other way, but that's all really up in the air. Although my PI does like to get those things down first, this particular project was sort of like, let's check if it's going to work, and then we'll see if it's going to work, then we'll go ahead with it. And then we personally hit it off, so it just is working. But yeah, I've collaborated on other projects where that's been clear from the outset.
So, I mean, this sounds great. It sounds like, at least for me, you kind of fulfill all what I would say the requirements for a good collaboration. The one thing that I would say is figure this out with the authorship, because this, I mean, as we all know, this can get dicey towards the end. And the earlier this is decided on, the less there will be fighting about. That would be my one suggestion. So, and I'm saying this from my own experience. So during my grad studies, I was in a lab where there were very few in-lab collaborations. Everybody had their own thing, and it was kind of a sink or swim situation. In my postdoc, I was in a lab where essentially every project was a shared project. Now, and it was for me initially a huge change, and I thought, like, no way, like, this sucks. I won't be doing it. In hindsight, this was phenomenal, it taught me, you know, a lot of what you were describing, Ilana. I encountered this as well. It taught me really a lot, and particularly with regards to being a PI, because let's say like this, both of us are fairly strong characters, or we're fairly strong characters. So it was not a situation where we were always on the, you know, on the same wavelength. And I would say the first half year or year, I kind of had to invest into convincing the grad student I was working with that what I'm doing is actually not complete nonsense. This is actually an idea. So the guy joined the project that I initiated. I wanted someone to join. And so I was not in a position to tell him, listen, buddy, that's the way it is. But I had to convince him. Now, your grad students that you will be having will also not be in a position that you just tell them that's the way it is and that's what you're going to do. You want to have them, you know, be convinced of what they're doing. That is way more powerful than you telling them what to do. So for me, this experience of convincing someone was extremely important. Another important experience was this, how should I say this? You can either call this kind of mutual trust, or you can call it kind of, you know, balance of mutual assured destruction. Or to say in other ways, either you hang on to each other or you hang next to each other. And so I think the alignment of interest for good collaboration is essential. As you said, Ilana, it should be a shared interest. It should not be doing a favor. And so that you kind of hang on to each other instead of hanging next to each other. And as I said, the idea is also that whatever you do together, the cake that you bake together is bigger than if you were to bake two cakes separately. And that means that your half of the cake is actually going to be way bigger than what would be your private cake. But I think it does also here require a constant communication. And for example, if, you know, one side feels, listen, this is not fair how this is going, the other guy is slacking off, you got to talk about this. This is, in my view, essential. And what is also essential is that that the PI is a part of this, so that the PI knows who does what, that it's not, you know, that there is a third party who knows what's up, and that in reports that you submit, it's clearly said, I did this for the thesis eventually. So parts that were done by themselves is, I did collaboration with a postdoc, and together we did this and this, which is fine. We just got to be clear about what's what. Questions about collaborations? Anyone? Let me see on the other side. No questions about collaborations. One of the nice things, just by the way, about the collaborations is, if this is working, you know, then it's more than 1 and 1. Then 1 equals 3 and not 2. And another thing is, when things are not working, you're not alone with your sorrows. So that's at least for me, this was a good thing. What else do I want to say? Right, and then the last thing of working in a group or making a strong group is giving and receiving feedback. And let me just put up the slide. Yeah, giving and receiving feedback. And that is probably the hardest thing in this job, right? It's absolutely essential to give feedback, but it's probably the hardest thing, because you want to give it in a way, ideally give it in a way that it's constructive, but that's not always possible. So you want to keep it focused on the work and not the person, but we all identify very much with our work. So to keep this apart is not so simple. I think one thing that I found is useful, or it can be useful, that you try to suggest solutions and you don't just say, you know, this sucks. The person usually knows by him. So the key is coming up with a solution, but that is not so easy, right? There's some people who like to kind of to use the American sandwich approach, which is, you know, first say something good, then comes the bad part, and then you again say something good. I think it's a bit a matter of style. At any rate, I would say you want to have, or at least I strive to have, climate in my lab where we can also say pretty harsh things without attacking the person. Because after all, at least my goal is to improve ourselves. We're all here to learn, including the PI. So that means also listening to stuff that you're not excited about or saying stuff that you're not excited about. And the key is trying not to take it personally. Try not to be defensive. That's so we're now to the receiving feedback. Listen, 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 listen. If everybody says the same thing, then they might actually have a point. If it's just one person, okay, that might be this person's impression. But if it's like 3, 4 people who say the same thing, well, they actually might have a point. And still means that you didn't explain yourself properly. So the how should I say it's your task as the guy who does the work or the guy who presents the work to present it in a way such that the audience understands it, right? And that's key. You cannot criticize the audience for not understanding you. The only thing that you can do is try to, by yourself, to improve how you're presenting something. Last but not least, is how do I resolve conflicts? Now, ideally, if everything goes well, you don't even have conflicts. Why? Because you listen to Evo and it's all going to be communication and one big love fest. Unfortunately, that doesn't work that way, right? We work in a lab, everybody is ambitious, everybody's working under pressure and so forth. So conflicts do happen. It's just that happens. You can call it conflicts, you can call it fights, you can call it arguments. It does happen. That in itself, in my view, is not such a big deal. For me, it just means that people are engaged and that they care. So what? So the key is not so much, to be, stunned when an argument happened. The key is really, okay, so now an argument happened. What do you do now? How do you resolve this situation? And I think here the key really is, once you want to try not to get to the situation of an argument or a fight, but once it has happened, you got to resolve it. You cannot just leave it as is. By just ignoring it, it doesn't go away. So you got to resolve this. That is really important. It's like, with a married couple, you can fight, whatever, but at the end of the day, you look at each other, you go to sleep together and you wake up again. So you better resolve this thing. So fights must be resolved. So let's think for a moment, what are the kind of fights what do we fight about? And here, let me share again the slide. Just a sec. So what do we fight about? There's kind of, you can, roughly divide it into 2. There's the fights between the lab members. There can be a fight about credit ideas. Oh, that was my idea and he took it from me. Oh, I should be first on that paper. Why is the other guy on my paper? And so forth. Then there's an issue of boundaries. The guy just constantly puts his cup of coffee on my desk. He's taking my reagents without asking. Then there's just issues of, simple lab citizenship. This person, she never cleans up after herself in the tissue culture. And then there is an issue of social incompatibility. He's a great guy, but the guy just goes on my nerves. I can't stand it. That's kind of, the lab members. And then there's the between the lab members and the PI. Again, it's about credit on ideas. Why did I get this spot on the paper? Another biggie is disrespect. You don't feel valued by your PI. The student doesn't feel valued by your PI. He's never counting me. She is always dissing my work, even though my stuff is great. Another recurrent topic is that the student or the trainee thinks they don't have the intellectual freedom. My boss is sitting in my tubes. I just cannot do what I want. And another one is lack of support. And this can come in form of salaries, resources, letters of recommendation. So these are, I think, by and large, the sources of conflicts. Did I forget something? Anyone? If I forgot something, unmute yourself and shout. Alrighty, no one is shouting. So how do we resolve these conflicts? Well, between the lab members, this is essentially, you know, to some degree on you, right? You are the resolution comes from everything. Compromise is not a bad thing, and I think solutions to arguments, besides apologizing, which, you know, if you said a bad thing, apologize. All of us do. They should be goal-oriented and pragmatic. And it should also be clear that certain behaviors are just unacceptable. You know, bullying is a big no-no. This just doesn't work. The guy who is bullying, enough. If you gotta go, then you gotta go. But you want to set certain boundaries between you and your lab members. Again, I think you want to mainly listen, and you want to be aware of the fact that you as a PI are inherently in a position of power. Even if even if you yourself are in the right, you're still in the position of power. So it might be that whatever the person that the student says to you comes from, you know, just from a position of inferiority. So you want to be aware of that. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything, but this is something that you want to be aware of. And again, I think the good solutions are often goal-oriented and pragmatic, and you want to be clear about your expectations, right? If a person, you know, if you have an argument with a person who is never in lab, then the person says, yeah, no, but this is my academic freedom. And you got to say, okay, fine, that's great, but you know, this is just not the style what I expect from my students. And it's better to say this clear out than to, you know, keep it in your belly. And I think this is the, let's see, this is, I think this is the one before the last slide, or the last topic that I want to talk about is, you know, if you have a conflict and the conflict keeps on going, and you see that this cannot be resolved, and you got to let the person go. How do you actually do that? How do you fire someone? So first off, I think it's better to let someone go who doesn't fit into the group than dragging them on. It's better for both sides. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. One thing that you want to be aware of, actually firing someone is not easy at all in administrative terms. So it's a big process, and that's, you know, if it's someone that was hired through HR, it's got to go through HR. If it's a student, essentially you cannot fire students. So students, they righteously so, they are very well protected by the graduate school. So this, you know, this doesn't work. So you got to think very hard. Do you want to go down that road? So that also means how do you hire people? What else? Did I have something else to say about firing people? Right, last thing that I want to say is, when you have the conversation about firing, I mean, you obviously don't want to say stuff like, you know, you're the last person on earth and so forth. Even if you think that, and even if you're right, it's just not helpful. So try to de-escalate the situation. Try to end the work relationship on as cordial terms as possible. And what usually is the fact is, listen, this is just a matter of incompatibility. It's not you, it's not me. It's just that we don't fit each other, and that's that. And I think in most cases that really is the thing. And then you can part ways, and that's that. I just saw that Ilana was asking a question. How do you have small group meetings without creating contention between different lab parts, one group that feels inferior to the other? I'll get to that in the QA part in a moment. With that, I think I'm way over my time, and I finish, and I'll be taking more questions. Ilana, are you still here? No, Ilana left.
Still here.
Is she still here?
Yeah.
Ilana, so let me quickly answer your question. How do you have small group meetings without creating contention between different? All of them have small group meetings. It's not that one part of the lab has and the other one's not. So I see all the lab members in the small group meetings, just in different small groups. Mm-hmm. Does that answer the question, Ilana?
Yeah, just sometimes I've noticed, and maybe it's the larger labs where there might be a group that's working on a hotter project, something a little more toward publication, and one that's a little bit behind, and then there's contention between the lab groups. This one, you know, sort of jokingly, but this group is considered, you know, better and that one less, and nothing tangible, but you know, it does kind of create
this idea of these small groups in my postdoc lab, and this was a very large lab, or fairly large, a dozen postdoc, a dozen students, dozen grad students, and then a dozen more people, you know, techs and whatnot. So is that a large lab in your vocabulary?
Yeah, approximately.
Okay, so with a very ambitious bunch of students and postdocs. And actually that was not so much of an issue that there was competition. Also, the way I have now these small groups arranged is actually not so much by project, but more by techniques, right? So all those guys who do EFIS together and imaging together are currently in one small group. They're not working on the same projects. That for once. And then the molecular guys are in the other small group. Why? It's just that they can help each other more, right? Even though they don't work on they don't work all on the same projects. In fact, some of them work on, or all of them work on different projects. So that's for one. Second, a little bit of competition I don't think is a bad thing. And third, I think at least initially in your lab, I would say you better want to be in a situation where all of the projects are super important, right? Because your lab will not be, how big is the lab where you are now doing your postdoc?
About 12 to 15 people, depending on the season.
Right. So your lab initially will be about half that size, at least initially. You know, I wish you that it will grow very rapidly, but at least initially it starts out smaller. So I think, you know, you want to do only the projects that really, you know, burn under your fingernails. And just by that, all of the projects are important. Now, which ones get published first is also a bit a matter of luck. I mean, it's hard to foresee this in my view. And so at least that has not, so far I haven't seen this generating contention. And furthermore, it's up to you as the PI. And I think that's a big part, is to give everybody a feeling that they're important, right? Is that, does that help you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That was great.
How do you respond in a situation where someone lies about results, work, data? Hey, Hannah, do I see you?
I'm here, but I can't start my video.
That's fine, that's fine. How do you, so I'd say, so, you know, that's a tricky question. So first of all, I'd say you don't want to get there, obviously. Second, I think the hard part is getting to the situation where you're sure that someone does lie, right? I think that is the much more frightening thing as a PI, because you're not, you know, you have to trust your guys to some degree, and you're very keen on getting the results. And so, you know, how do you now strike the balance, not forcing them into, you know, I wouldn't even want to say fabricating, but, you know, interpreting it in their favor. I think that is much more tricky. Now, if you find someone lie about their results, I think you have to pull the red card. You say once, listen, this is impossible. If I find you again doing this, you're out. As simple as that. Is that an answer for you?
Yeah, thank you.
No, listen, in this job, your credibility is the only thing that you have. So whatever comes out of your lab, at least in my view, has to be in iron, you know, has to be, or set in stone. So being in a situation where someone lies, if it's lying intentionally, dude, you're gone. Goodbye, just not here. And by the way, you won't be having any hard time convincing the grad school or whoever it is that this is not, this person should not be in the program. Now you can say, okay, it's a rotation student or a master student who is very new to this business. Okay, the first time you realize that, you pull the red card and say one more and you're out. This is not 3 strikes. This is 1 strike. And the next time you're out, and you want to pay very close to attention. But I guess you know this as well as I. This is kind of something that kills your career. So I think this is something that we just cannot tolerate in any which way. And you want to make this very clear.
Okay, thank you.
What are some of the strategies for retaining knowledge in a lab? Yeah, I think that's a great question. That's an awesome question. So first of all, we didn't have this situation yet because no one actually left the lab. So far, all of them stayed. But so one way to deal with that is having two people work on a project. And you want to do this in a staggered way, right? So you say you have a grad student who started a project, and after 2 or 3 years, another grad student joins this project. The advantage is that the incoming grad student very often helps to push a paper over the line and then continues. And so learns the know-how. So this is this kind of, these overlaps. That is a very useful thing. Another thing that goes without saying, but is not so easy to implement, is have a notebook. Have notebooks. And so one thing that I did in my lab is we use electronic notebooks, lab notebooks. And so this at least at least there's not an issue of handwriting. That's one thing. And now and then you want to have a look. Do people actually fill their notebooks? That's another thing. You can set up kind of reagent banks for central reagents. Our lab, for example, uses a lot of plasmids and viral stocks. So those are organized in central banks. Another thing is the core personnel that we talked about. So these highly skilled workers in your lab, they definitely serve as know-how banks as well, right? So even if it's not them developing a certain technique, you want ideally the person who develops this technique transfer it to them to a degree that they can continue doing that if necessary. Are these satisfactory answers? Ilana, I think you were asking.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
Any further questions? Asaf Lamont, is this Asaf Lamont from UCSD? No?
Yeah. Hi, Ivo.
Hey, my name.
Okay. All is good, yeah?
Yeah. Any questions that you want to know? Maybe you can help us how to implement Windows and stuff like this.
Sorry for a second, let me just rearrange. I'm running an experiment right now. Pretty much everything. That was pretty great. Thank you, Ivo.
Sure. Good luck. Shana
Thank you. Toda rabba.
Any further questions, guys? So I think what we will do is all these slides, if you want them, just shoot me a mail. I'll be happy to send them to you as a PDF. Noam Volpe, hands-on versus hands-off. How do you make sure you have time if you wanted to do more than hands-on work as a PI? Noam, where are you? Let me see at least your black screen. I think that's everybody with their own style. I think one of the big transitions that I've definitely seen myself go through, and I see most of my younger colleagues go through, is that from doing your self-research, you develop into a research manager. That is fairly inherent. And so this is really, this is more of a personal decision than anything. How much you do want to do research. And I don't think that there is a right or wrong in that. It's really a matter of character and also of your research program, right? So I decided that I want to do certain things in my lab that, for example, I have no idea how I'm doing this. I just don't know how to do this. Asaf Lamont, whom we just had, he would be an expert in doing this. So I just don't know how to do this. So obviously I have to delegate this stuff. Other things I was teaching, the first 2 grad students myself. That's how we do it. So, and then they were teaching on. I think this really depends a bit on your style and what you would like to have. There is forever, whoever knows this guy, Bruce Bean, Harvard Medical School, the guy is in the National Academy of Sciences, high-end neuroscientist. The guy is still doing his own experiments, even though he's been doing this for years, and his experiments are great. Another guy whom you might know, Hillel Adesnik, I think he's now an associate professor at Berkeley. Fairly impressive. The guy published a neuron paper while he was, running for tenure. Single author. I mean, he published a neuron paper. He published many neuron papers, but that was a single author neuron paper. No idea how he did this. Kind of, by the way, I don't know, evening hours over the weekends, but he found time. So I think this depends very much on you.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Alrighty, guys. Again, feel free to shoot me a mail if you want to have this this presentation. I'll be happy to share it. And bear in mind, ultimately it's you, and you have already a ton of experience. You've been doing this for many years, so trust yourselves. You will be doing mistakes, and you will be doing great. And literally not one young PI that I've seen was free of struggles. There's those who have a hard time recruiting people, but they get all the grants. And then there's those who get all the people, but cannot get grants. And then there's those who get the grants and the people, but they cannot publish their papers. So the grass is not greener on the other side. It's just as green as it is on your side. So you will be doing fine. Shana Tova.
Ivo, thank you so very much. It was wonderful. Thank you everybody that attended. גמר חתימה טובה to everybody, שנה טובה, בריאות לכולם, להתראות בוובינר הבא.